Now let's explore how Wyoming is shaping the future blockchain through forward-thinking legislation. This panel will examine efforts to provide legal clarity, establish a strong regulatory foundation, and position our state as a leader in fostering innovative Web 3.0 businesses. Our panelists bring expertise from both state and federal levels. First, Chris Rothfuss, Senate Minority Leader of the Wyoming Legislature and co-chair of the Wyoming Blockchain Select Committee. Senator Rothfuss has led Wyoming innovative digital asset legislation since 2018 and serves as a professor in the University of Wyoming's Honors College, who was previously a Science and Technology Diplomacy Fellow at the U.S. Department of State. And Rassa Ebrahim, representing Tax Network USA. Rassa is a tax controversy attorney with an LLM in international tax and estate planning. His work bridges legal practice and innovation with a focus on cross-border tax issues, legal technology, and AI compliance. Please help me welcome our digital asset policy panel.
I'm literally going to kick you guys off and get out of the way because, knowing both of you, you're talking about topics that I don't think anybody knows as well as you do. So with that, thank you.
I appreciate everybody being here. This is an important exercise every year at the University of Wyoming, and we've been doing it for 8 years now with the Blockchain Stampede. Appreciate the center for putting it together and continuing to host. As part of the Blockchain Stampede every year, we start off with our Blockchain Select Committee meeting. So Monday and Tuesday of this week, we were over in the library here and working on some legislation that again, we're continuing to refine and revise what we've done in the past and be forward-looking. I think, obviously, Wyoming has positioned itself well from a policy standpoint on blockchain and digital asset technology. And we've done that, really, first of all, by hitting the ground running 8 years ago. So we've been working this space longer than any other state. And, I tell the story. We did it because when we first learned about how the state was engaging with digital assets, we learned that the state of Wyoming was doing it horrible. Our statutes were exactly wrong. And what it came down to was a constituent of a colleague of mine, Tyler Lindholm, who's supposed to be here right now and isn't. I don't know where he's at. Anyone seen Tyler? No? Okay. Tyler was interacting with someone who said that they were trying to buy Bitcoin on Coinbase, and Coinbase at the time wouldn't operate in the state of Wyoming. This was back in 2015, I think, late 2015. And so we looked into that and asked the question, well, why? Why won't they operate in the state of Wyoming? And learned that our division of banking was interpreting the Money Transmitter Act in such a way that Coinbase had to hold an equal amount of fiat currency to whatever transaction was taking place through the digital asset, through Bitcoin or whatever was being transacted at the time. And so they basically had to double hold. And that's totally unrealistic and unreasonable. But that was their interpretation. And so as good legislators do, we just looked around and thought, all right, well, we're clearly doing this wrong. What should we be doing? How are other states doing it? And quickly found out that most of the rest of the states were doing it right, but not by any intent or by any understanding of digital assets or the blockchain, but just by pure luck, random luck of an interpretation. And our state was doing it wrong by that same random luck of interpretation. And we thought we could probably do better than that, right? We could outperform random luck in the digital asset space. And Tyler was an avid enthusiast, and I was as well. And so we started talking about what an opportunity for the state of Wyoming to lead in financial technology as we move into the Web3 space, which it wasn't called at that point in time, but we were looking at digital assets and thinking this is an area where Wyoming could define the sector. And we took that opportunity. We engaged with some incredible people like Stephen and Caitlin very early on. Other early OG folks in digital asset space, created a task force and really started building policy from that point forward. And we did it in a unique way, which I think Wyoming is unique and capable of doing, which is engaging directly with all the stakeholders and then listening and learning and asking questions like, all right, so what's holding you back? What do you need to be successful in digital asset space from a regulatory standpoint? And what we learned quickly was clarity. We need to be able to provide bright lines. If you are doing this, it is legal. If you are doing this, it is illegal. That seems really simple. Seems like the kind of thing a government should be able to tell you, but we all know watching the news for the last several years that is not as simple as it seems. Try getting an answer out of the SEC, for example. Try getting clarity out of the SEC. Well, we brought that spirit. We worked with industry, and I think we did an incredible job building components. One of the first things we built, which was foundational. Nobody talks much about it, but it becomes one of the most important aspects of the work that we did, and this was back in 2019, was establishing how digital assets look under property law. Property law is boring, confusing, nearly inscrutable as you're reading through what is called the Uniform Commercial Code, which is drafted by the Uniform Law Commission. And as you dig in, you realize that there was ambiguity with digital assets. So in 2019, we put forward legislation defining how digital assets would be recognized with regard to the Uniform Commercial Code. And we actually did that in opposition to the Uniform Law Commission. The Uniform Law Commission is a group of attorneys that sits down to study problems. They figure out, all right, well, this is the way the law should be. And they had a little draft on digital assets, and it was pretty clear from the draft that while they had attorneys, they didn't have anyone talking to the digital asset community or to anybody that was really intimately familiar with how the law should look. So we basically scrapped their suggestion, put together our own statutory proposal. The Uniform Law Commission reached out to the legislature and says, please don't adopt this. We're the Uniform Law Commission. Do as we say. We don't like you guys thinking for yourself. We rejected that and built this framework that then, over the ensuing years, was adopted by the Uniform Law Commission. So we built the framework that then became the uniform law. And as most of you probably know, other states have started adopting that. So they followed in our footsteps, where the key concepts, the underlying concept is that digital assets are representing intangible personal property, and that effectively, if you hold the keys and you control the digital asset, then that is the property in your possession. The uniform law was looking at having third-party possessors, similar to, again, more like securities than cash. We wanted to make sure it was behaving as close to cash as it possibly could. So that challenge underlies, I think, the rest of the work we did. That was not exciting. That was not headline news, but it was really instrumental in making things happen. And then we started building additional puzzle pieces along the way, listening to needs, understanding that the community and the industry was being debanked. That discussion about debanking put us down the path towards the special purpose depository institution, Speedy Banks. So we have a 100% reserve entity that isn't necessarily, but can be FDIC insured, trying to get away from the debanking pressures. We also empowered that entity to custody digital assets in the following year. So we started building up financial institutions, inviting entities like Kraken to the state of Wyoming, and working with, again, some of the leaders in the field to build out the financial technology space. We looked in other areas, looking at how business models should work in a Web3 world. So with digital assets and decentralized finance, decentralized business operations, looking at then DAOs. So we passed the first DAO LLC Act and followed that up just last year with the Decentralized Unincorporated Nonprofit Association, the DUNA which you're probably all familiar with, responding to industry demands so that now we have, Uniswap has relocated to the state of Wyoming and is one of our first DUNAs recognized in the state. That's something we're proud of. And then we looked at other puzzle pieces, looking at, for example, you're probably all familiar with the Frontier stable token, the Wyoming stable token that is imminently going to be fully and completely released. And that has been a project we've been working on for almost 3 years now to provide a conduit between the state of Wyoming, between government and the digital asset space so that we can seamlessly transact, so people can pay their taxes, pay their tuition to the University of Wyoming, engage in a meaningful and authoritative way with both digital assets, government, others, and utilizing an asset that is very trustworthy and asset backed. All of this is inspired by industry. It's inspired by stakeholders. It's inspired by our conversations where we keep asking, what do we need to do to enable this sector? And we've had as a bit of our mantra throughout the process, the idea of regulating to enable rather than regulating to restrict. That's very different, right? We've been asked for regulation. Industry wants regulation because that means they know what's legal and what's not legal. You can't go fundraise and recruit capital by having the conversation, hey, we've got this great idea. We're pretty sure it's legal. That's a bad elevator pitch. Don't try that. So you have to have certainty. You have to have confidence. And that was what we wanted to brand. I'm going to stop there and give you an opportunity for a little while since I've just dominated the conversation a bit, but I wanted to provide a bit of background and then Nick will have some conversation looking forward.
No worries. I'm not sure this is on. Can you guys hear me okay? Here, I'll give you this one kind of family. Well, yeah. Okay, so my name is Rassa Ebrahim. I'm here with Tax Network USA. I work in the digital asset space from the practitioner perspective. We are based out of California, but we work with Wyoming directly, making, a lot of Wyoming LLCs in my company, for example. And, Wyoming has been a big innovator and pioneer in this industry. And so we're really happy to be here. And thank you to Stampede for inviting us and for inviting me to be able to speak on this panel last minute. I have prepared some notes about some things I want to talk about. But in general, when I talk, I'm going to try and give the perspective of the practitioner and to try and help you guys understand how we're seeing this, impact our taxpayers' daily lives and how we can use the new legislation that's been enacted moving forward in the next couple of years. Are there any law students, University of Wyoming law students here, or future law students or lawyers who went to the University of Wyoming? Yeah, we have some lawyers here. Okay, so I'm sure that hopefully I'll be helpful on my the points that I'm making. As we talk about blockchain's role in reshaping the global economy, one of the most important pieces that I think was often overlooked going to conferences like this. Tax Network, we've been to the Bitcoin conferences in Nashville and Vegas and Amsterdam. And we've seen a lot. We've talked with a lot of people in the space. We talked with Kraken, Bitcoin, and all Salt and all these other companies. Some of them are here today as well. One of the most important pieces overlooked, I think, is education around compliance and tax strategy. It's not enough just to teach students how to code a smart contract or trade Bitcoin. I think they also need to understand the legal and financial systems these technologies are, that they're interacting with. And I think it's especially important now, considering the law, as has been discussed, has been changing so quickly, so recently. And Wyoming has really taken a leadership role in providing clarity through forward-thinking legislation, like recognizing DAOs, like was just discussed, and building a strong regulatory foundation for Web3 businesses. That clarity is powerful because it creates a safer environment for entrepreneurs, investors, right? You don't want that elevator pitch saying, I'm not sure if it's legal, it might be legal. Nobody wants to hear that when you're trying to make a pitch. Ultimately, that creates a safer space and it makes it easier for students to transition into the space when they're in high school, when they're in university, thinking, they want to become a trader full time and how that's going to impact their life long term. From our perspective, digital asset literacy isn't just about wallets and private keys. It's about preparing the next generation to navigate tax-efficient structuring, asset protection, and federal reporting requirements. And I'll be speaking more about that in the coming minutes. Whether it's no mining equipment, reporting staking rewards, or structuring a DAO to operate lawfully, these skills are just as critical as the technology itself. And if we want to see sustainable growth in this sector, educators, policymakers, and practitioners, we must all work together to integrate these elements into the curriculum. And by doing so, we prepare students and future lawyers, hopefully future policymakers, future minority leaders of the Senate, for example, and majority leaders, people who want to go to Congress, federal Congress, to innovate, but also innovate responsibly with the legal and financial literacy to protect themselves and their communities. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say starting out, and I think I can pass it on again.
Well, let's talk about looking forward a little bit, and where things are going. Again, being responsive to the direction that industry is skating, right? Trying to move towards where the puck is going, not where it's at right now. There are a lot of things that Wyoming has on our radar, and my select committee has on its radar, that are challenges that are really difficult legally to tackle. The technology, in a lot of ways, is easy compared to the legal constructs that have to figure out how to appropriately support and recognize this technology. So we've really tried our hardest, and we're pretty nimble in Wyoming. We can get legislation passed quickly. We can get things done well, and that's been one of our strengths. But it's still hard to keep up, right? You end up changing, industry changes. Does everyone remember the idea of NFTs a while ago when we were buying those and selling those quickly, and there were billions of dollars were being traded every day about apes on yachts and things like that? And we barely do that at this point in time, but NFTs are still an integral part of the industry. They still have a tremendous function, but now you start thinking about, all right, well, I've got some real world asset perhaps linked into this NFT, or this NFT represents intellectual property rights. All of those concepts have different legal buckets that they fall into, but we're creating assets that mingle among different legal statutes in ways that become confusing and complicated. And when you get to the point, as often happens, that there is disagreement and a court needs to be involved, you want that court to have some idea on what to do. And it's incredibly challenging right now with some of the more complicated structures. So real world asset-backed tokenization, obviously that is where industry is heading and is already at, but is heading in that direction. We know that we're going to be seeing tokenization of assets, tokenization of, a piece of beautiful art hanging on the wall. All right. If I have a token that represents that art, I can think of that as a contract for ownership of that art. All right. That's pretty straightforward. Okay. Now I know how to deal with it. It just represents the art. I've got a contract for possession of that art. Okay, now I'm going to split it into 10,000 pieces, and I've securitized that particular piece of art. Do I still have a corner of the art from a legal standpoint, or do I have now a tokenized security representative of that art? And the answer is unclear. And unfortunately, on that one, the state of Wyoming doesn't get to decide, because once I say the word securitization, now the SEC gets to come down and tell us what to do, even if we disagree with them. And that's been one of our biggest problems, candidly, is we would love to have done so much more in securities, but we're preempted on securities by the feds, and they don't let us make as many decisions as we like. We can govern property, and this gets kind of weird. It becomes a blurry space. States have autonomy over property rights. So when we declare something property, we tend to have the capacity to regulate and create a statutory framework that surrounds it. But a security has been preempted by the feds. So as you start moving into that nebulous, obscure realm of we may or may not be a security, help, we start the struggle. So trying to address real world assets, tokenization of assets. That's something that's on our horizon. We're going to start looking at that. We have a Wyoming Stable Token Commission at this point in time that has overseen the creation and release of our Wyoming Stable Token Frontier. But as we move forward, we're going to likely broaden that mandate to start looking at more types of digital assets as perhaps more of a digital asset authority, and try to find ways that we, the state of Wyoming, can more authoritatively govern these real world asset fax tokens and other types of tokens. So that's one piece on our horizon that we know is challenging. And obviously there's battle raging at the federal level about how to treat different assets as we look at the next round of legislation, whether it's the RFIA or Clarity, depending on whether it's coming from the House or the Senate, and looking at the treatment of digital assets under existing statute and who's going to regulate them. So that's a battle to be had moving forward. One more that we've spent an awful lot of time on, it gets back at some of the concepts that went to the previous conversation, relates to trust and privacy and all of the benefits that we can get out of a sophisticated Web3 environment where we can have authoritative digitally signed transactions. We can verify identity. We can know whether it is me at the other end of the email or phone or transaction or agreement, or whether it might be an impersonator or imposter, because I can authoritatively provide a digital signature to that. And that gets us into the discussion around digital identity and self-sovereign digital identity concepts. We've been talking about self-sovereign digital identity for as long as we've had the task force, trying to piece by piece put together a comprehensive self-sovereign digital identity system in the state of Wyoming. And we've taken some statutory steps towards it, but there are a lot more pieces that need to get into place. And that relates and ties into concepts of organizational digital identity. So it's not just about us as a person having a digital identity for a corporation if you choose to. And obviously with DAOs and DUNAs, you probably start with that digital identity, but you might have an LLC that sells shoes and you might not have any digital identity at this point in time, but you might want to be paying your taxes or authoritatively signing documents through a smart contract that you're engaging in with Web3 technology. You have to have someone that you can kind of point to and look to as a bit of an oracle that says, here is the registrar for digital identities, and it's a trustworthy registrar. Typically, governments will do that, right? We have a corporate registration system, a corporate filing system through our Secretary of State's office. That's where we envision having corporate digital identity residing, hopefully in the near future, in the state of Wyoming. And then you could have an individual digital identity as well that might be authoritatively recognized through that. This would always be optional. We want to make sure that this is always self-sovereign in the state of Wyoming. We respect individual autonomy. We want to make sure that this is an opt-in and opt-outable type concept, but it can offer a tremendous amount of value. And then that takes us to some concepts of privacy that we're working on. And one thing, and I'll say we've got young people in the room. I teach at the University of Wyoming. I'm going to get on a little bit of a soapbox for a second. I'm personally just a little bit horrified at how little priority people are putting into privacy at this point in time. My students in my classes here at the university and my kids even, they're used to having already given up their privacy to such a degree that they can't worry about it anymore. It's almost like it's not something we particularly value because we lost it. You know, I lost that. Am I going to spend my time worrying about my privacy when everything about me is already owned by 27 different global corporations? Oh, plus I have, 9 different social media accounts that have pictures of everything I've done for the last couple of years. So it's almost like a pre-surrender of privacy. Well, on the Blockchain Select Committee, a lot of us would like to get that back. We'd like to get privacy back and restore the capacity of an individual to govern their own data, own your data, govern your privacy, opt in, opt out. We've seen GDPR, for example, in the EU trying to move in that direction, but that's on only a consumer basis. And same thing with California Consumer Protection Act and other acts that are out there. So this is one where, I'd reach out to the community. Wyoming really wants to find a more revolutionary solution on privacy so that we can kind of leapfrog the hodgepodge of what's going on in the country where nothing is effective right now, and get back to the point where if you want individual privacy, we can actually get that achieved. And we do have a lot of authority over that as a state of Wyoming. So we can do a lot, but you can imagine the resistance, the challenges, and how hard it is to put privacy back in the bottle, once the genie's already escaped. So that's a lot of our vision right now that we talk about when we're planning for the future on the select committee for Wyoming, and always engaging with stakeholders, always updating what we've been working on. And I'll have one more point, but I'm going to give it back to you to kind of hit on some of that future points.
Yeah, thank you. Those all really, really helpful. I actually want to tag along on that little point on privacy as well. As I'm on the cusp of the Gen Z generation. I was born in 1997. I'm a young lawyer, and I also have social media accounts, and I also agree it's important that we can continue to strive to try and get our privacy back. And I'm thankful that Wyoming and hopefully some other states, like my state of California, we have the California Consumer Protection Act, and in the EU they also are like moving forward with this, like said, on the consumer basis only, but that's a start, and we need to focus more on that. Like, for example, with Instagram, I don't know if any of you had heard recently that they had a feature where you had to opt out specifically for Instagram to, some of you nodding your heads, for them to track you, and they can track your localization, your whenever they want. And it was just thrown at us. If you have an Instagram account and it's on your phone, potentially they're tracking you right now. They're seeing that you're at this blockchain conference, and who knows what they can do with that information. And it's not just about your location, and all the photos that you're posting. It's also about, your livelihood, and, being able to, have that for yourself, and being able to share that when you want. And also, of course, your assets, your money, right? Would you want everybody in the world knowing where you put your money, how much money you have in it, where your money is coming in from, whether it's like you're a W-2 employee and you're getting a paycheck, or if you're getting it from stocks, for example. And that's why I really like the idea of the Wyoming LLC and what you guys have been doing here. And we've been using that a lot as an asset protection vessel through our firm. And one of the main benefits I've been seeing from the Wyoming LLC is the charging order protection. So basically, for those of you, some of you, I'm sure the attorneys here are very well aware of how the charging order protection works. But basically, and because crypto is, considered a property that can be put into a Wyoming LLC, thanks to the new legislation, what you can do is you can put your crypto into the Wyoming LLC. And if you have a creditor, for example, who wants to come after you and, take your money, you can even tell them, you can say, I have crypto in this Wyoming LLC, and they can go and tell the court, there's crypto in there. We're owed that money. And we want to be able to get that, but they can't touch it as long as all they can do basically is just sit up from the outside and wait for a distribution to be made. And, this is something that, it can help protect a lot of people in certain situations. And so that's why we've been using it, and if profits from what's interesting from the tax perspective, this is me as a tax attorney kind of getting a little nerdy, but if the profits in that LLC are undistributed, the charging order holder, so the person who's trying to, the creditor who's trying to get money from that LLC, has to pay taxes on those profits. And so essentially, they don't technically even have full access to the crypto in an LLC, for example. But if the crypto is making money, or if, there's a real estate asset in there that's making money, then they have to pay taxes on that while not necessarily owning the asset. So it can actually make, a creditor's claim go in the negative and make it not worth it. So that's something we've been definitely using. Again, and also, I probably didn't introduce enough about myself. So my background is in international tax and estate planning. So I deal a lot with trusts as well, and I do a lot of federal and state tax controversy. And one of the things we've also been seeing is the issue, and this is a little bit different than what's been spoken about, but the issue of potentially, having double taxation if you have crypto in multiple different countries. If you have a business, that deals with crypto, you want to also be avoiding being taxed by, for example, Ireland and the United States and potentially another country in the EU or Brazil. And how do we navigate that? Well, we have international tax treaties, of course, bilateral tax treaties between the United States and different countries. And unfortunately, these things, especially with the way things have been going recently with the federal government, they can take a long time to negotiate. And as a result, they take a long time to change. So one of the things we've been seeing is slowly international tax treaties and bilateral tax treaties, as they're getting amended, as they're getting added between different countries, they're updating the rules for, trading crypto and things like that to make sure that people aren't getting double taxed and having to deal with that on their own. But it's something that is probably going to take a lot of time, and that's something hopefully that we can bring more attention to on the international space, because at the end of the day, we all want to not, some of us, of course, are happy. I'm happy in the United States, having my business here. I'm in my bar license in the state of California and working with each and every state, including Wyoming. But some of us also want to do business internationally and want to go to Europe, want to go to Latin America, want to go to China and trade crypto as well. So it's important that we clarify these things, going back to my original point, in the law, which is, again, I'm really happy to hear like what Wyoming has been doing here and how they've been really innovative and pushing forward for this education, and also to just make it codified into law, the clear responsibilities of each party involved with crypto trading and mining. For example, the miners, the crypto traders, and also the government officials, the lawyers, the judges, what their roles and responsibilities are. So I think that's something that, we can even improve upon in our big state of California. And we can look to Wyoming as an innovator for that. And, we can maybe copy some of your ideas. I'm really curious to see how things move forward in the federal space and the state space, as well as in the international space. And I can pass it off to you as well, back to make some more points.
Thank you. And following up on that last concept about double taxation, that is something that we looked at on the select committee. And the conversation is a good one, because you have an asset that is represented on a blockchain that, assuming that it's appropriately and sufficiently decentralized, is hopefully, in every corner of the world, many, many times over, demonstrated through the testament of the blockchain. So where is that asset? Right? That's a great question. So from a technology standpoint, we don't care where that asset is. As a matter of fact, it's a good thing that I can't point to that asset. That is a feature, not a bug. That is the strength of the blockchain, that I don't have to rely on a specific location. I have perhaps millions of copies of the chain distributed around the planet. From a legal standpoint, you want to know, where is that asset? It matters because someone is going to tax you if you hold that asset. And what does it mean in that particular location? Is it property if you have that asset? Well, one of the first things we passed back in 2018 or 2019 was a declaration that a digital asset under Wyoming statute is not property for the purpose of property taxes, right? So we clarified that we were treating it at that point as a currency rather than a tangible property that would be taxed through our traditional property tax. And that was before we got into the whole, all right, well, what is a virtual currency? All of the depth of talking about stable coins and everything else. We just early on said, all right, this is not going to be taxable for property tax purposes. But something we did recently, 2 years ago, was trying to address this double taxation problem, and we created what we call a Wyoming registered digital asset. So again, through the Secretary of State's office, now you can authoritatively register a digital asset. And as you all know, a digital asset can be a compendium of digital assets if you package it right? So you're registering it and saying, this is in Wyoming. And the state of Wyoming says, this is in Wyoming. We agree. That digital asset resides in Wyoming for legal purposes. As a state in this country, we have authority to do that. Now, does the rest of the world, getting back to that, does the rest of the world believe us? I don't know. Again, that gets back to things that you're talking about with negotiated global tax agreements among countries. They do not necessarily have to defer to what the state of Wyoming says, but if we negotiate appropriate agreements with those other countries, there should be respect for what our states are declaring as far as tax residency and asset residency. So this, again, is something that stakeholders like you came to us and said, here's a problem we have. We get double taxed. We have this concern where we don't know where a digital asset is. We would love for it to be in Wyoming. And it's not just for tax purposes. It's also for access to our courts and our statutes. So if you come into conflict over an asset and that is registered as a Wyoming digital asset, then you have access to Wyoming law to support that digital asset. You're working with Wyoming law, not the law of whatever state somebody's suing you in, perhaps, or trying to claim that the digital asset might reside in. And then you also have access to our Chancery Court, which is another innovation. It's sort of an old school innovation, I guess. Delaware has had a Chancery Court for many years. It has a lot of features and upside when you get into technical matters or complicated matters. So tax matters are incredibly complicated. Digital asset matters are tech complicated. And a lot of times a more traditional court really just doesn't know what the hell you're talking about when you walk into that court and start talking about digital assets. So if you have a chancery structure, it's a little different structure for the court. You can bring in expertise better, and you can present that expertise in a way that allows, a battle of experts to be taking place rather than more of a battle of traditional attorneys, even though the experts are often attorneys as well. So we adopted that in recent years in support of these digital asset endeavors. And therefore, if you have a Wyoming registered digital asset that comes into legal problems, then you'll have access to the Chancery Court as well. So again, it's building out all of these pieces. We think of them as puzzle pieces that have to come together to build an overall picture that really encourages this industry and enables innovation in this space, so that you've got that clarity, so that the state knows what to do and has answers to challenges. The other thing I kind of wanted to point out about how we work policy, which is very different from the federal level, and you're all watching this right now at the federal level, a tremendous amount of negotiation at the federal level goes into an omnibus bill. And we just saw this with the Genius Act, and we're seeing it now with Clarity or RFIA moving forward. And so these are comprehensive. All the different pieces are sort of crammed together. You hope it's right. It ends up getting compromised often in ways that, industry we might not like, but others might like. And so it's a bit of a challenge, but that's the way it's done at the federal level. Assuming you can actually get something done at the federal level, that in and of itself is Herculean. So it was incredible work by, a bipartisan group of senators and representatives to get Genius Act passed. And so, congratulations to Senator Lummis and Senator Lummis's office and all the work they did, my friends there and friends across the country that worked on that. We do it a little differently. And we do it the way that I think legislatures are supposed to be responsive. which is to address an issue, do our best on it, listen to stakeholders, and bring the best novel legislation forward that we can. But then recognize it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay, particularly with new technologies. Regulating and governing new technologies is an incredible challenge. We'll get it wrong. If you worry about getting it wrong, you can never really get anything across the finish line. If instead you come with the philosophy that we're going to probably get it 90% right, then it's a lot easier. You bring your 90% right, and then you start listening immediately. What is screwed up here? You'll get a lot of feedback, and you'll get real-world experience. People like you will come in and say, this worked great, but boy, this over here really screws things up. Fix it. And we start that iterative process as if we're developing software, not legislation, right? We have bug fixes every year. We've got like feature freezes that we put in place. We're going to fix this year, and then we're going to start working on this. And, we just finished our committee meeting where we're passing legislation on special purpose depository institutions. This is probably the 5th bill, I want to say, related to speedy banks. It's, again, cleanup, responsive to stakeholders, looking at where we can do better. And unlike the federal government where they never want to open anything back, we've got a bipartisan, both chamber group of excellent lawmakers that all come together to solve problems rather than create new problems. And so, we'll have a feature fix on our speedy banks. Same thing for DUNAs. We had the first of its kind legislation in the country. When you make first of its kind legislation, it's not going to be perfect. That's a great process. So we immediately start taking our feedback, and as people are putting together DUNAs, 3 or 4 little flags rose. Here's some problems. Immediately fix them. So we'll have legislation for the next session addressing those DUNA concerns. Same thing for Wyoming Stable Token. We'll have a feature fix on that. Not fundamentally changing the program, but just correcting some concerns that have come up along the way. And so from a policy standpoint, what I really want to stress here, and then I think we'll probably go to questions pretty soon, but what I want to stress is that's the way you have to govern new technology. And this is my little caution. The feds want to pass laws that preempt the states. Who do you want doing this? Do you want what we see at the federal level, making legislation to govern innovative technologies, or do you want the process I just described where we're back at it, listening to all of you, in the room with all of you, taking direct stakeholder input, and then creating remedies? So that's my little pitch for federalism, right? There's always the discussion about states being the engine of innovation, and they certainly are when it comes to legislation. And we need to make sure that we don't get too wrapped up and enthusiastic about federal legislation that ends up stopping the states from solving problems and doing the right thing. That's always a caution that I have. There are things that we need to solve at the federal level, but it kind of comes down to, if you don't need a federal solution, don't make a federal solution. Leave it up to states to innovate. You are all innovators in your spaces, and states can bring the same type of innovative spirit. Again, not as good as all of you because we're still slow and lethargic a little bit, and sometimes we get into fights and it becomes political instead of policy-based. But states are certainly much more capable and much better at solving these types of problems, and we'll continue to lead in that space. So I'll pause there. I don't know if you have any final comments before we go to questions, but please.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments, but that was all very well said, and I just want to tag along quickly on that, and then we can definitely take questions. But one of the things I think that's important on top of, and this is kind of going off the past few points, is that it's important to look at digital asset policy in order to sum this all up in one space as not something that we should treat politically. And what I mean by that is like not something like Democrat versus Republican, Independent versus Green Party, these kinds of ideas coming from specifically one party, that, the party has to stick to their talking points on that. And, no matter what, the Democrats are always going to be saying that crypto is a bunch of fraud, and the Republicans are always going to be saying we should not regulate crypto at all. No, this is not how we should be, in my opinion, approaching crypto, and I also specialize in AI compliance. It's a very similar kind of field, emerging technology field right now. And I think there's more of that on the AI compliance side because AI has been so integrated in daily life, whereas crypto, you can kind of choose to invest in it or not, just like stocks. But I think we need to bring that more into the crypto space and, focus on what's the best for the consumer, what's the best for the government in this situation. And, we shouldn't be using, looking at crypto as just an asset or a vessel just to avoid taxes, right? We should look at crypto, celebrate it as like a way to, invest money, make money, but also look at how we can fairly, establish a system where we can fairly pay taxes so that the government's happy. And also we're happy that we're not, like as traders, for example, we're not losing all of our money to taxes while investing in crypto. I think, I'll just end there and then we can, take questions if anyone has any questions.
Great. Any questions?
Chris.
And I started asking, gosh, how that the play bottles, it trace of what wants to be or show folks you that they I don't then I don't know. And that's bit salt it would AI first put on it. Well, how did that person come? Then that's one factor of a guides or 8% or that's big keep it is and that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you'll have a public key basically, and that becomes the identifier that funds, whatever going to your intellectual property can go to in a fair and equitable system. You can do that for music rights and other rights as well. There's a lot of discussions, a great use case for a blockchain and our Web3 technology. Another one really, as we're getting into AI, and we talk about AI on the select committee as well. We haven't really taken a lot of legislative action yet, but one thing we have talked about, and you're all familiar with, concerns about deep fakes. Well, having a verifier of truth, so to speak, is going to be handy in the not so distant future. Like if I'm taking video in real time, nothing says that I can't be, hashing every 10th frame of my video or something like that, and then dropping that hash with a signature on a blockchain as a verification of the veracity of my video. And those types of technologies are already out there. They're not used very much now, but they will be used, right? We're going to need that. I'm going to need to be able to say, this is legitimate video, and you can see the signature path for every 10th frame of the video on blockchain X over here. And that's how I then create veracity of truth. So as we get into AI technology, which allows us to kind of make things up a little bit, we're fortunate enough to have blockchain and our distributed ledger technology to give us some objective truth through registry and the same type of identifiers. So, that's handy that we have that capacity. If we didn't have that capacity for distributed trustless verification, then we really would have problems moving forward. So great project. Absolutely. Right. Well, and that's a great question going back to what we were talking a little while ago with own your data tech concepts. We chose and have so far chosen to believe that Facebook owns that data. But that's a choice. And, the state of Wyoming, for example, has legal authority to say, nope, that data is my data. Every last bit of it. I'm letting you use it under certain terms and conditions. I set the terms and conditions, not you. Haha. Wouldn't that be great? Right? Reverse that whole thing. And at that point, if you're going to be holding my data, maybe you have to pay me for some of that data that's getting looked at a lot. And again, with the blockchain registry, you have the capacity to do that. I've got my unique identifier. We have smart contracts, micropayments flow, and everything becomes easy and straightforward. And if I own my data, I can also finally, once and for all, say with a little more confidence, I'm shutting it down. And if we got really sophisticated to the point where it was permission-based, I could literally shut it down. Instead of sending them the little note that says, please delete my data, I could shut it down from you no longer have the keys to my data. And therefore, I don't need you to take any action. Thank you very much for sharing with my data for a little while. Now, that's clearly a bit of a challenge to get there from here, but from a technology standpoint, very much doable. So these are all the exciting things. This is where blockchain Web3 can enable us to be better and to have more control and be more autonomous, be more self-sovereign. Or it can, if we don't use it right, do exactly the opposite. So I know this group wants to use it right and get us to the point where we have that self-sovereignty back and that privacy back. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, David.
My view would be you set up overall and way. And the person being managing you in verification with the Secretary of State, at least as far as state's business.
What do you do to nudge them if they're not in the page? I mean, if they're not on or following us?
Well, I think all of you should call the Secretary of State's office and say, hey, it's about time that we have self-sovereign digital identity validator on that website. I've already made that call a lot of times. So don't hold back.
Currently building solutions for physical products using NFTs, specifically livestock. Does that fall under property or currency as far as taxes go?
Yeah. So, are you saying it's NFTs that you're mainly dealing with? Right. I would have to take a look exactly like how it's structured, but in the way I'm seeing it, it seems like more that's structured as property, and that's something, for example, if you wanted to put into a Wyoming LLC, I think you would be able to do that in terms of structuring it. But I'm going to project. So I think, and that's something, again, and this brings up the point that we were talking about earlier, where it's like we need clarity on this, right? Because it's a complicated topic, and it's an emerging field. So these two things intersect to make the law really difficult for the average consumer or the average person, in state of Wyoming, state of California, or even in the Netherlands, for example, to understand. So I totally understand where you're coming from, wanting to ask this question and think, what's going on? How should I structure it? And looking at the law and thinking, this is a bit difficult, but in that specific circumstance, I would think it would be like, based on what you're saying, structured as property, and then especially considering it's like a digital property, or tying it to a physical property. And unless you're Wyoming is categorized with chattel differently. So the mic just came back off. Back. Welcome back. No, another. Well, okay. Well, either way. Yeah, so that's how I would characterize it. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I'd just say, we have talked about the idea, and we can do a little work on this in the state, but IRS doesn't have to listen to us. The idea of the underlying asset dictating what classification the asset is a good idea a lot of the time. So that has merit. But then we talk about the idea of, I create a token that's tokenized representation of a portional ownership of a basket of 100 chickens, 25 rubles, and the music rights to a recent Taylor Swift song. I don't know how I characterize that now. And you can easily do things like that with tokenization, and it just becomes problematic. So it's always this down the center of the plate is easy. The margins are difficult, and we're getting the hook right now. So I just thank everybody. Really appreciate all of your time, and appreciate all of you being here. Thanks for coming.